Giant rats, crazy scientists, and evil rednecks who literally get bitten on their necks. All part of VHS 94. Welcome to the final part in my VHS review series. I've still got the spin-off to go, but I've decided to leave that one till last, even though chronologically I think it came out before some of the other ones. VHS 94, though, is the most recent of the mainline anthology ones. It came out back in October on Shudder, and it really revitalised my interest in this series. It inspired me to go back and check out some of the older ones as well, do some reviews, and here we are, all up to date. So just as I've done with all the reviews in the series up to this point, I'm going to be starting by talking about the wraparound story today, and then I'll move on to the main stories, and then I'll finish with my conclusion. But for now, in the beginning, let's talk a little bit about the wraparound. So in this story, if you can call it a story, there's a SWAT team which descends on this huge building as part of some kind of drugs bust. I'm not sure what this building's meant to be, but it's absolutely massive. It's like a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, but the SWAT team don't really find what they expect to find. Instead, what they've come across is basically the HQ of the cult behind all the videotapes that you see in these movies. You can tell that they've spent a lot of time on the set design for this, because we keep coming back to this segment between all the main stories, and it's always in a different part of the building, a different room. There's loads to look at. There's like weird mannequins in toilets, bodies with their eyes gouged out, crosses on the ceilings. It's quite atmospheric. There's some really good visuals. And in the very finale, which comes in the epilogue of the movie, I'm going into spoilers now if that bothers anybody, it turns out that two of the SWAT team are actually members of the cult, and they turn the tables on the one remaining guy who's still alive at this point, and they make him part of their very latest snuff film that they're doing. So, I mean, it's not an amazing wraparound, but it's reasonable enough. It didn't annoy me having to keep going back to it, and it's certainly better than some of the framing devices that were used in the earlier VHS films, although overall I'd say that the ice cream van segment from VHS Viral is my absolute favourite in the series. So this is the first of four main stories, and to my surprise, it's the weakest in the film. That doesn't normally happen in a horror anthology. Ideally, you would lead with a really good one, and if there is a weak story in the set, maybe dump it somewhere in the middle. It's not that this is terrible, it's just a little bit mediocre. So the story sees a newsreader and her cameraman descend into a storm drain to investigate the local legend of something called the Rat Man, who loads of the local homeless people say that they've seen, and people have heard this thing through sewer grates and stuff. The newsreader has her doubts that this thing exists, of course, but it turns out that it does. Not only that, but it has like 3 or 4 human followers who sort of act as its guardians and help find it victims and sacrifices. The trouble with this story is that once the shit hits the fan, the terror and the suspense that follows barely lasts more than about a minute. I think the other stories in this film do a much better job of prolonging things. It does have a really good ending. There's this other newsreader who gets his face melted by black tar, and it's glorious. It's really good practical effects, very Evil Dead-ish. But other than some fairly atmospheric moments early on when the two main characters first go into the storm drain, there's not a whole lot to enjoy here. And like I said, the stories which come later on are much, much better. This one takes place in a funeral home, so there's a dead body in a casket, and a young woman who presumably works for the funeral home, she has been tasked with looking after this body overnight, kind of like a night watchman sort of role. I didn't know that this was a thing with funeral homes, that if a casket is left in one of them overnight, then someone has to stay to look after it. Maybe it is a thing in real life, maybe it isn't. But of course, the body in this particular casket is not dead, or maybe it is dead and now it's just coming back to life. We spend quite a few nervous minutes with this woman as she starts to hear more and more little bumps and knocks from inside the casket, and she's getting more and more freaked out, and there's rain beating down outside. All it needs is some lightning, really. Out of all the stories in this film, this is the one with the most old-fashioned scares and chills. It feels like something which could easily have been on one of the old Amicus collections from the 70s. There are more good stories after this one, but they're more action-orientated. But again, the most impressive thing is the special effects. When this body comes out of the casket, it's had its head like sliced in two, but at an angle. But it's really impressive. They've done it really well. You get a little skirmish between the character and the creature, but the effects is definitely the most impressive thing. That and the beginning of the story, when you get the nice slow build up and a good sense of atmosphere. I don't know what's going on with the ending. The woman kind of stumbles out of the building seemingly still alive, or maybe she's been turned into whatever this creature is. It's a bit unclear, but I don't think it particularly matters. I did enjoy this one. This is an improvement over the Storm Drain story, and we're very much on our way now. Out of all the stories in the collection, this is absolutely the most batshit bonkers one. So there's this crazy scientist who is operating out of a network of underground basement rooms. I think they're set somewhere in like a big industrial building. This guy's basically like Jigsaw. He just randomly owns really bleak, huge places. So what this guy's doing is kidnapping random people and turning them into half-human, half-robot things, and they're all different designs. So this one guy, he's taken his head and put it on like spider legs to turn him into a kind of robot spider mechanoid thing. I like that word, mechanoid. I'm going to stick with that. There's another guy who he's pulled his arms off and replaced them with swords. I don't mean like pirate swords. I mean like big, thick, nasty things like you might see in Final Fantasy, or the type of sword that Pyramid Head creature had in Silent Hill. We mainly follow the action though through the eyes of this female mechanoid. She's had her head replaced with like a metallic camera thing that's quite thin. Somehow she's managed to retain some of her humanity, and throughout the story she's occasionally good, she's occasionally a bit murderous. What happens halfway through this is that a SWAT team turns up because they've been looking for the guy responsible for all the disappearances in the local area. They quickly kill the scientist, but they get trapped in this building and the various creations come to life, and therefore you get this big battle between the SWAT team and the dead scientist's creations, but it's all out war. And the main problem for these SWAT guys is the guy with the swords. He's just ridiculously overpowered. He starts killing all these SWAT guys, but I don't mean like just cutting them across their chest like you'd see in a film like Braveheart or Pirates of the Caribbean. He's literally dissecting and dicing, cutting heads off, cutting soldiers in half. It's Carnage Candy on a really extreme sort of level, and there's bombs and grenades going off and guns being fired. The female mechanoid, at times she has no choice but to kill some of the SWAT guys because they go for her. Other times she helps some of the SWAT guys. It's a hell of a war. It's really frantic, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. It's not normally my sort of horror, but for a 10 or 20 minute segment, it's a hell of a lot of fun. My only niggle with it is that it takes a little bit of time to get going. I don't think this particular story needed the slow, suspenseful build-up that the casket story needed. It's not that kind of thing, but very small complaint. This was absolutely awesome to watch. The word terror in the title has a double meaning in this instance. So yes, there will be terror in the story, but there is also terrorism. So the story is about a group of militants whose only reason for existence, seemingly, is to try and stick it to the man on a daily basis, and their latest harebrained scheme sees them plotting to blow up an FBI building. They're a bunch of wankers, basically, but they do have an ace up their sleeve, which is the fact that they have a vampire captured and chained to the wall in their compound. And what they've realised is that if they take blood from this vampire and take it outside, then when the sunlight hits the blood, it will cause a little mini explosion. So what they've realised is that if they can get a lot of this blood out of this vampire, put it in a really large box and take it to the FBI building and leave it in the basement, then when daybreak comes, there will be a massive explosion because of all this blood, vampire blood, that's been left in the building. But we never quite get that far because the story takes a certain turn, shall we say, halfway through. It goes down the 28 days later route, so the vampire gets loose and starts picking off the rednecks one by one, and it could not have come a moment too soon for me because I really could not stand these guys. I do enjoy the action in this. There's lots of cool deaths. One issue I did have with it is that I think it could have been a lot funnier. This could have been the comedy one of this collection, and they've chosen not to go down that route. There were loads of moments where I was just getting ready to laugh, and it's like the writers just decided to pull back and not quite give the proper punchline for the situation. The main guy who is in charge of the militants, he's like a cross between Martin Adams, the darts player, and the dude from The Big Lebowski. He's sort of comic, and there were loads of times where I thought they could have made this scene, this situation just a little bit funnier, but they just didn't go down that path. I still enjoyed it overall. I still think it's a worthy story to finish off this collection. It's pretty good. And I've got to say, the idea of taking vampire blood to try and make bombs is a really good concept, actually. My conclusion is that this is another very worthy entry in this franchise. This film currently has a Rotten Tomatoes score of like 92% or something, unusually high score for a horror film. I think the previous film, VHS Viral, only got like 30-something%. So critically, this has been a success. I really enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure you will if you give it a shot. I hope they end up making a fifth one. It doesn't even bother me if they take a long time to do it. I think there's 7 years between the third film and the fourth film. If they want to take another 7 years to make something as good as this, I am absolutely down for that wait. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score it. So we've got 1, 2, 3... 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I will be back very soon to review the spin-off, which is based on the very first story from the original VHS. It was the one about the flying female creature who terrorised a load of blokes in a hotel room. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining me for this review of VHS 94. Until next time, bye-bye.